DC20 0.7 Alpha is here, y'all. It is time for the update video to let you know what rule changes happened and the absolute massive quality of life improvement and class overhauls that happened in 0.7. But wait, there's even bigger news, is the Kickstarter for DC20 launches tomorrow, if you're watching this video right when it posts. It's live June 4th. Today's June 3rd. June 4th is when the Kickstarter launches. Absolutely crazy. We made it. We made it to the launch of the Kickstarter, and that is thanks to you guys' support of watching videos, support on Patreon, support from picking up the alpha in the early access back in the beginning to be able to get us to this point to launch the Kickstarter. And if you're even kind of interested in DC20, whether it's the stuff I've said here or in other videos, you gotta check out the Kickstarter. There is a ton of free stuff that I'm throwing in the Kickstarter. If you back the Kickstarter the first 3 days, you get 3 absolutely free PDFs. There's 2 stretch goals that are gonna be the early stretch goals of the Kickstarter, which give 2 more free PDFs to everybody. And there's even more stretch goals depending on how crazy this thing gets to unlock more classes like the Spellblade, more ancestries, magic items, monsters. Ton of stuff. All Kickstarter backers get free access to the beta and every single update of the beta along this journey until the final release of the full game. So if you want to be part of the craziness, tomorrow, January 4th at 10 o'clock Central Standard Time, I'm starting a live stream launch party because the Kickstarter launches 1 hour after that at 11 o'clock Central Standard Time. It's gonna be crazy. So for these overall changes, a lot of these are just little small quality of life things, even just renaming of things. So for example, the damage types. Holy and unholy damage is being renamed to Radiant, which you're familiar with from 5th edition, of course, it's light damage. And then the unholy damage is being renamed to Umbral damage. I think it's super sick name. So we have Radiant and Umbral instead of Holy and Unholy. Lots of different reasons for that, but I think it's an overall much better place for it now. Acid damage is also being changed to corrosive damage. This now also means that a Druid spell, instead of having to have it be something like necrotic, of this blight spell that's necrotic, instead of that being tied to evil like unholy damage, we can now actually say that that's corrosive damage. Acid already in general in tabletop roleplay games is a little bit on the lower end of usefulness, so being renamed to corrosive and inheriting some things from what necrotic damage used to be from 5th edition, that's going to make it shine just a bit more. Also, while still having the opposites of Radiant and Umbral damage. Speaking of Radiant and Umbral damage, there's a damage category in DC20 called Mystical damage, and the Mystical damage is Radiant, Umbral, Sonic, and Psychic damage. These all used to target the mental defense, but a very simple vocabulary change in the 0.7 is mental defense is now being changed to mystical defense. That's just going to be a better way to say it because mental defense works really good for psychic damage, but it doesn't really work as well when it comes to Radiant, Umbral, and Sonic. So now there's going to be physical defense and mystical defense. Super clean, and actually the mystical damage types all target mystical defense. Super clean. And while we're on the concept of damage types, force damage has been removed from the game. I think this is overall just a better thing. What even is force damage? It's magical damage smashing into you. That's going to be, there might be spells that deal magical bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage by the way you're slinging mystical blades through the air, conjuring them up together and attacking them. Cool, because in DC20 there's never been, nor will be, magical damage like it comes from 5th edition where you're like, oh, it's resistance to weapons that aren't magical or something like that. That's not a thing in DC20. So there might be spells that deal bludgeoning, piercing, slashing damage. That might be a cool thing. But if we really want to deal force damage, that scary damage type that not a lot of things can avoid, we already have that in DC20 in the form of true damage. So something simple like Magic Missile now, instead of dealing force damage, it deals true damage. Next rule is that dynamic attack saves. There was a change made in the 0.6 that's being reverted back to 0.5 state for this new update. Basically how dynamic attack saves work now is how they originally were intended to be. Whenever you make an attack against someone's defense, that deals damage. And whenever someone makes a save, they make that save against your save DC, which you already have baked into your character sheet at the start of the game. And that is for effects. That's how it originally was supposed to be, and that's how it was clean. Works super well. We made a change to try and streamline some things. Didn't really work out and broke some other things that were unintended, so we were reverting that back to the better state that it was in before. And for some quality of life improvements, you can now unsheath a weapon as part of making an attack. So if you have no weapons drawn or whatever and you want to make an attack with your bow or with your sword, you can draw that thing as part of the attack. Because I'm not trying to have game masters out there, gotcha, you didn't say you drew your sword, ha ha ha, and then they have to spend a minor action to then stop. The spirit of DC20's rules aren't gotcha rules like you might be familiar with in other times where, oh, sorry, you got to spin this. Oh, I'm sorry, you didn't do that. Ooh, 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 ooh. gotcha. There's definitely rules and definitely things you can do and can't do and all that kind of stuff, but I don't want you to feel like there's these gotcha rules. So next up is grit points. There's another additional option in addition to what you could already do with grit points before. A new way to spend grit points is you can spend 1 grit point to reduce the damage that you take by 1, showing that grit and really pushing through. Oh, and rest points, one of my favorite updates to this whole situation. It ties into something having to do with the sorcerer, but here's what the rest points are now in the original intent of what they're supposed to be. Now, rest points just heal for 2. You heal 2 hit points per rest point. That's it. Very, very simple. Every rest point you spend, you heal for 2. That's all. There was a new change added in 0.5 or 6 that lets you be able to gain a bonus amount of healing equal to your might. And that was intended for might characters, a little boost to might and all that kind of stuff. So I still want to do that, but here's how it now works. Might characters now just have more rest points, and it's still very simple to spend rest points instead of some weird things that are going on. So now the formula for rest points is your level, which at level 1 is just 1, right? It's always been your level, but you also add your might and you gain that many rest points. Minimum of 0, don't worry about that. You at least have 1 rest point. You're not gonna have negative rest points. That'd be weird. But those mighty characters that have a bigger might have more rest points that they're gonna be able to heal up better. It all works out. Now we've arrived to the class changes. I just did a video last week about the updates and overall concept of how unique spellcasters are in DC20. Y'all have left me some comments wanting to see a big showcase of marshals in that way, so I might do a future video on like specifically marshals of DC20, but I'm gonna try and do a quick overview of some of the changes of this to that that's been made for each class. Wizards first up. The biggest thing that they have is Spell School Initiate is a brand new feature that lets you be able to choose a spell school at level 1. No, this is not a subclass type of situation, nor are the wizard subclasses going to be each of the schools of magic. That's going to be something totally different. And there's going to be some really cool things for subclasses of wizards, things like chronomancy, graviturgy, and all that kind of stuff. You get the idea. But anyway, this is going to be their new cool feature that is brand new. And if you notice, mana limit break has been removed and moved to level 2. We'll show you that here in a second. The biggest thing here is you're going to be able to reduce the cost of mana that you spend on these spells by 1. You can't do it all the time, but you're just going to be really good at casting this specific spell school. Another quality of life change for Arcane Sigil is you can actually move your sigil now. You can spend 1 action point to teleport your sigil to underneath you again. Just for 1 action point, no extra mana cost, super nice quality of life. Then going up to level 2 now, we have prepared spells. This is a really cool and my favorite version of what a prepared spellcaster means. And in DC20, how this looks is when you complete a long rest, you choose 1 spell that you know. You study up on that spell. You practice it during the rest. You read up on it, whatever. And you are now just a little bit better at casting that spell. It's not like you've forgotten spells that you used to know or you used to cast the spell, but now you just magically don't know the spell anymore. Nope, nope, nope. This is where the new home for mana limit break is. This 1 spell you've chosen, and you can switch it up. Remember, long rest, you can switch it up, is you are now able to increase the mana spend limit by 1 for this spell. You can only do it once per long rest, but that resets on whenever you roll for initiative in combat. That is a big mechanic in DC20 where it's, once per long rest, but it also resets when you roll for initiative, showcasing the, it's time to go. Surge of adrenaline, fighting for your life, all that kind of stuff, which also will come back online if you do certain other things like hostile, your life's in danger type things, not just combat. And then there's a little bit of tweaks to arcane points, which also still hit on the class fantasy of, you have these amount of points, you're able to boost the power of your sigil with these points, and you're able to boost certain spells within that spell school, and you can spend them like mana as long as it's within your spell school. Sorcerer now, we have a new thing called innate power. I want to be able to have people be able to say what kind of sorcerer they are. Again, at level 1. Not a subclass all the way, but this is a very, I think, clean version of how to get this across at level 1 by giving them some choices and options. Just like the wizard has a little bit of choices and option with their spell school, sorcerers get innate power. They can choose where their magic comes from. Is it intuitive and they gain an additional spell and cantrip, knowing more magic? Resilient, advantage on concentration checks. Unstable magic. There's where your wild magic is. Yes, it's pretty awesome. And a new wild magic table. It's a new 0.7 wild magic table. But all sorcerers across the board get +1 mana. They have the most mana in the game, technically speaking, just straight up level 1 class-wise. And that makes sense to me, because they are sorcerers. The magic is in their blood. And once per long rest, they'll be able to sculpt and enhance and modify spells in a little boosted way. Then we have Overload magic, absolutely unchanged. Their flavor features unchanged. Meta magic also in general is unchanged. It has a little bit of different options now that we're starting to look more at the big picture of spell casting in general. But another quality of life for meta magic is it no longer, the mana you spend on meta magic no longer counts towards your mana spend limit. So you're able to actually push spells pretty far. Again, it's only these options here, but you're able to push spells and add these effects to them without having to worry about the mana spin limit. So you can cast a 1 mana spell if your mana spin limit is 1, and you can enhance it in this way. You can pick one of them, you get the idea. But you might have noticed sorcery points are gone, and you now have Font of Magic. This is a very cool thing for the Sorcerer, because the Sorcerer has magic inside of them, and they are able to actually spend rest points as mana points whenever you're enhancing spells. Rest points, like I said before, you gain a number of rest points equal to your level plus might. I don't want every sorcerer to have to be a might-based sorcerer, so instead you can now switch and they actually gain your prime modifier instead of just having to force you to do might. But you can now spend rest points, spend some of that energy, body, endurance to be able to push your magics and tap into that. Now for Warlocks. Warlocks, you're going to notice they inherited one of the features from the Sorcerer. You'll see if you notice it here in a second. But Life Tap has been renamed to Sacrificial Bond, and the health bonus that you could have, there's a HP enhancement that you could do where you could spend health as mana points to cast spells. There were some really difficult, weird interactions where you could cost your health to then heal, which then creates these weird loops. So we've removed that from the game. It wasn't working as intended, and it was ultimately creating more design barriers for the game in the bigger overall health of the game. So that's been removed. It's been renamed to Sacrificial Bond. All of this still works similarly as well. And then moving on to Pack Boon. This again is some options and choices at level 1, not a subclass, for your Warlock. You can choose Packed Weapon, it's unchanged. Packed Armor is unchanged. Packed Cantrip has taken some of the bleeding elements out of it. I didn't want to focus overall with the Warlock. I didn't want it to be as blood-centric. I didn't want to be that type of vibe. It's still a patron, and there's a pact, and they are connected to your life force, your life essence, your blood, your body. You are connected. Your soul is connected to them in that way. Sure. But I didn't want to wrap it as much blood and stuff in there. So that's been taken out now, and now once per round, you can cast this Packed Cantrip at advantage. And Packed Familiar now just gets overall more customization options. It was pre-selected choices before, but now it's just a very simple, you get 3 additional familiar traits that you can choose for free. Then at level 2 now, you might notice something, Life Tap. This is now a new Life Tap feature. It's not the same Life Tap as the one before. I did like the name Life Tap, but the Sorcerer features Spell Break, if you're familiar with that. Sorcerers had a feature called Spell Break. They could spend their health to be able to cast a spell for no mana. And taking a big step back, that definitely seems more like a Warlock thing than it is a Sorcerer thing. Sorcerers are tied to rest points. That feels right for Sorcerer. Warlocks are tied to your health. So Life Tap is now literally a Life Tap. You use your health to try and cast mana in this way, in a more limited way that actually feels a lot better. And then there is Life Drain to heal yourself back up from all this health that you're using. You can actually heal a bit better now. Clerics now get a little bit of updates as well too. The Cleric Order, another choice that you get to make between Priest, Scribe, or Templar now has been renamed from Protector. I think it's just a lot cooler, Templar. Whew. Scribes has been changed. In general, handing out advantage on skill checks is just not something I wanted to do at level 1. Just giving out advantage on blanket in such a big way, especially in certain other parts of the game with skill challenges and stuff. I don't want to just throw out advantage that's easily. And then Priest also has a little quality of life buff where whenever you heal a creature, you can restore 1 hit point to another creature within 1 space of you, including yourself. It's like a little bit of residual healing magic that you're able to kind of spread around or take for yourself. Basically what we did is took Divine Spellcaster feature and Divine Order and combined them into Cleric Order, because you still get all the same stuff with your Divine Damage type. You get to choose Radiant or Umbral. And then just another easy renaming of Divine Prayer to Divine Blessing, and then you now can choose your blessings, and you're able to get these from other sorts of things, and other subclasses in the future can also give you more blessings too. Super simple. Divine Omen's just been rewritten. It's basically just been rewritten in a better way to kind of showcase what this feature is all about, and being able to ask and reach out to your god. Then the level 2 feature used to just be Channel Divinity. It's now been broken up into 2 different features of Divine Intervention, which works similar to how it did before. Because before, Channel Divinity had 2 options, the censure option and a Divine Intervention. Basically, those have now been their own entire features, and they're not connected to each other as far as recovery is concerned. And speaking of recovery, Divine Intervention does that. It does a healing and mana boost as you reach out for replenishment to your god, and you're good there. And then Channel Divinity, you can censure undead and literally stun them, or you can censure celestial and fiends and intimidate and deal damage to them. Druid got overall just a quality of life upgrade with the way that their features are written. Druid Domain now fits on the screen. Before it was a very large feature, and then wild form was a very large feature. So we really wanted to do some work at just cleaning some things up. So there were some enhancements that were originally a part of this feature that have been removed and moved to level 5. So at level 5, you're going to be able to do some extra cool stuff with Druid Domain, but just not right now at level 1. It was a bit too complicated and a bit too much to chew on at level 1. And now you get your spaces automatically. There was a weird thing that was unintended where the Druid had to make a spell check in order to cast their Druid Domain. Well, now that's a problem because then that starts your multiple check penalty. And now the Druid's just at a disadvantage now on a spell they want to cast. So that feels bad. So now you just get 8 Druid Domain spaces and you can place them in a line however you want as long as they connect to each other. And then Wild Form has another quality of life as well, and it's not quite as intimidating of a thing to read because you have your Wild Form, True Form, Wild Form, you get these stats in it and you base it off of this stat block. And it's a lot easier whenever we base it and connect it to a stat block. So, hey, you want to shift into an animal? This is your stat block. You want to modify and enhance it? Cool, pick different traits. Super simple. And then level 2 now, Nature's Rest is pretty much the same. It's just kind of a little bit more quality of life as far as if you're just in nature and you're with a druid, you're going to gain the benefits of getting more rest points in this way. Super cool. But then there's Nature's Veil. This is the weather. Druids already had nature and animals, and now we have the trifecta of weather. And they truly can embrace the nature itself, and they can cast basically a weather modification. They can clear the area up, they can open it, they can make it rain, they can get fog in there, lots of different stuff. You can even add vulnerabilities to certain enemies if you want to put a whole bunch of sun, have a static electricity fill the air, make it really cold. This feature is just a lot more dynamic than nature points, which is what they originally had. And in general, across the board, all of the classes, we had a goal as a team to remove the points, because points are a very easy thing to do. Wizards still do have arcane points. We'll see if those stick around. But in general, we had a goal to remove points. It's very easy to have points and like, oh, you have this new thing of points and you can do certain things with them. But in 0.7, we really wanted to be able to try and not rely on that as a crutch and be like, you know what? Let's make some really cool features. And Nature's Veil is a great example of really taking the druid and elevating the druid and really taking that class fantasy and knocking it out of the park instead of just giving them more points. Now for the bard. The bard has a little bit of skill reduction here where your +2 at level 1 is instead of a 3, it's now a 2. And I think it was at 9, it's now a +1 instead of a 2. So instead of +10 more skills, you only get +8 more skills. Still have some more skills. They still are that, jack of all trades type of situation. But that's just one little small thing for the bard there. But then bardic performance it no longer requires concentration. We want to be able to have these bards performing a song. And if you want to cast a spell, we don't want your class feature to get in the way of a spell that you want to cast, right? So bardic performance no longer requires concentration. Super cool. And helping out your allies now with Font of Inspiration is super simple. It got a little bit complicated, just like in the same way with the Druid's Domain had like extra features you could add mana to that made it a bit more complicated. Font of Inspiration also had some like help enhancement things that we are taking, removing, and putting into 5th level. Keeps things a bit more simple now and keeps things more in line and not as much. Remarkable Repertoire is also the old flavor feature, which took visual and auditory, if you're familiar with the old Bard's flavor feature, and combined their old flavor feature with Remarkable Repertoire into one. So now you get to pick 2 spells from any spell list, which is awesome, and you get to choose visual or auditory, which means we got to give them a new flavor feature that feels a bit more flavor aspect wise as far as not combat stuff. You can spend 5 minutes performing to an audience of some kind, and you gain bonuses and benefits to charisma checks against them if you succeed on a save against them. You're doing a performance, you got to see if they're all wrapped up and they're like, oh, fascinated by you. Whenever you've ever had like a magician perform a magic trick too, and you're like, oh man, that's so cool. I wonder how they did that. And they almost feel like they're a little bit of a celebrity in that way of like, oh, that's so cool. How'd you do that? It's not a crazy benefit. It's just advantage on a charisma check, and they have to fail a save for it, but I think it's very fitting for a bard. And then level 2 now, Inspiring Rest is pretty much the same. And instead of a signature spell, which that kind of concept has moved over to Wizard a little bit with their prepared spell. They have Counter Charm. In the same way that they want to help their allies and be able to benefit that way, Counter Charm is going to be able to let you, for action points, no mana required, for spending action points, as a reaction, you can be able to help your allies, prevent them from being charmed, taunted, intimidated, rattled, or frightened. Love it. There we go. There's the 6 spellcasters. And we already had a little bit of a sneak peek for the spellcasters in that last video. But now let's get into the martials. We got to start off with the fighter. The fighter is, it's your standard warrior type archetype in this whole big picture thing. And with the fighter, I wanted to remove a lot of 5e holdovers. A lot of things that are just like, oh, the fighter in D&D has a fighting style. Okay, and then DC20's had a fighting style. And then with DC20, we tried to give them 2 fighting styles, but then what happened is people ended up just picking the weapon type that they wanted and then getting +1 physical defense, which is not that exciting. Passive benefit and a specific benefit, right? And then also with fighters, they had adaptive tactics, which was this whole thing where you gain, and as combat goes on, you get better and better. It was a feature you had to keep track of, which is kind of clunky, and it started off very, very weak and then ended very, very strong, if not the strongest feature. It was kind of weird in that way. So now the concept of this adaptive fighter in battle is now being accomplished in a little bit better way. And they also get a brand new feature at level 1. So let's just show you. Technique Master. You now, as a fighter, get to pick 1 technique at level 1. And if you remember, nobody gets techniques at level 1. Techniques come online at level 2. Except for the fighter. You get 1 technique, and this also is, I guess you could say, a bonus technique. So fighters will have more techniques than other classes, which feels very fightery, and they can spend 1 stamina to reduce the cost by 1. Now that still means you can't spend more stamina than the maximum that you possibly could. You basically just reduce the cost by 1, give you more flexibility in that way to spend your stamina. And then that brings us to my favorite thing to show you guys with the fighter, Adaptive Arsenal. This is basically fighting styles and adaptive tactics in 1. To explain it simply, there are 5 different fighting styles for the fighter. Dueling, which is 1 weapon and a free hand. A sword and shield, which that's, you know that one. Dual wielding, which is 2 weapons. Great weapon, which is 1 big weapon holding with both hands, and then ranged weapons. So what Adaptive Arsenal does is it gives you access to all 5 of those fighting styles, and you gain the benefits of that fighting style when you are in that weapon loadout. So if you are dual wielding, you get access to the 2 weapon version right here. If you switch to a ranged weapon, you now have this benefit. If you switch to a great weapon wielder, you now have this benefit. And at the very beginning, you actually are easier and better to swap weapons around already. So depending on the situation, depending on the type of enemies going on, depending if you want to be defensive, offensive, lots of enemies, single enemy, whatever you got going on, a ranged enemy, you can switch your weapons and be super good. Feels very fightery. Absolutely love it. There's that. Level 2, Action Surge is the same. Second Wind is pretty much the same, except now you actually just heal instead of this temporary hit points, which would not interact with other temporary hit points, because then that could be kind of weird. So it's actually a heal that you kind of like get that second wind back in yourself, and it triggers on bloodied condition on yourself instead of 0 hit points. So it has a better chance to trigger. Now for the Barbarian, this was really exciting and cool. Another 5e holdover was Reckless Attack. That has been removed from the Barbarian. I don't think Reckless Attack, again, like I said, it's a 5e holdover. It's the exact same mechanic as 5e, and I really wanted to just move away from that copy-paste type situation and truly have DC20 be its own thing and take a big step back and try and think of better ways to have mechanics get across a class fantasy. Because the class fantasy of a Barbarian that touches on is, offense, attack things. I don't care about getting hit, raw. That's already accomplished with Rage. Rage already does that, and I think it does it better than Reckless Attack. So as far as class fantasy is concerned, that's a big check already from Rage. And Rage for Barbarians in 0.7 is the exact same, no changes there. There is one little nerf here to Barbarian stamina spending, is you cannot gain stamina from like a heavy hit that you do, this big heavy hit where you spent stamina and action points and all this stuff to do this big heavy hit, and you spent stamina to then gain stamina. We're trying to watch out for that interaction in general across the board, and it just leads to this infinite stamina loop moments, which is something we want to avoid just for balance reasons and the way stamina is supposed to work. So that is being changed. But Reckless Attack, now back to that, has been removed and replaced with Berserker. Right? These 3 lines of Berserker is pretty much Savage Defense. You're very familiar with that. Mighty Leap, you get +1 movement speed, you get a new armor situation here. That's all standard. But you now get Charge. Barbarians get Charge, and on your turn when you make a martial attack, you can move 2 spaces immediately before making the attack. So you're able to really charge into battle that much better by just getting free movement when you make attacks. Very Barbarian-like. And speaking of defense in this way, Barbarians and Monks adding Prime to their defense was just a bit too much at level 1, so that's been changed. This formula has been changed to +2 instead of plus your Prime. Prime is 3 at level 1, and it just was a lot at level 1, especially when we start getting into multi-classing situations and people just going around to pick this up, and the feature itself already got buffed with the addition of Charge in the first place. So this is going to be a +2. Now, I will say, a little sneak peek in the future, at level 5, this will become prime again, and we're going to introduce scaling at higher levels. And that's one thing that's going to be nice about DC20 as well, is if we have class features at level 1 and 2, whenever level 5 comes along, if we want to introduce scaling or make them better or all that kind of stuff, we can just upgrade them at level 5. So now at level 5, now this feature becomes this, and you gain extra benefits. Moving on to level 2, Battle Cry. We have some upgrades to Battle Cry. You now get Resistance 1 instead of physical damage reduction, which Resistance 1 is better than physical damage reduction against physical or elemental attacks. You get +1 damage or +1 speed. So very simple for the Barbarian. It's -1 damage, +1 damage, and +1 speed. Very simple for that Barbarian. And now we also added an additional mechanic of brutal blows. When you score a brutal or critical hit against a creature, you knock the wind out of them. They make a physical save, and if they fail, they lose their breath, lose their concentration, they become impaired, and cannot speak until the end of their next turn. A literal knock the wind out of you type of mechanic. Super awesome. Monk now has some similar concepts that happen with the Barbarian of condensing features into one. So now, Monk Stamina is now new. Monk Stamina is whenever you make an attack, when you make a melee martial attack and you hit with it, you gain 1 stamina. Monks have had the most amount of changes to their stamina across the time, but this is my favorite so far, because now with the yin and yang push and pull of monks, we have the offense and the defense, the outward and the inward. So now the stamina is the outward offensive type of energy, and the key points, which you get at level 2, is the defensive reactive type of energy. So now that brings monk stamina into a really cool spot. And then monk training, you're going to see a lot of familiar stuff in monk training. Monk training is basically taking patient defense, the unarmed strike type stuff, second wind, and condensing it all into a concept of monk training. And now, as far as multi-classing things, there was a weird spot where monks had so many features that it was hard, if you wanted to get one, to multi-class, and then all you got was just this small little feature, and it wasn't really that good. So we condensed things down. So now monks get 2 features, not counting your stamina feature. So you get monk stamina, monk training, monk stances, and that's all you get level 1. And that's all you need, because we've condensed it down in a very clean way now. We have also removed the interaction where monks could just make unarmed attacks and not suffer any penalty of multiple check penalty. That just feels bad, and I don't think it was good. I was hesitant in making that call in the first place, and after playtesting with it, I just don't think it's a healthy thing for the game for a class to be like, oh yeah, I can just attack, and there's no multiple check penalty. Maybe at higher levels and stuff like that, we can play around with it, but not at level 1. So the new version now is your unarmed strikes deal 2 damage and are considered light weapons. You can dual wield your own fists, right? But they also have the impact property, meaning they deal 1 more damage on heavy hits and above. And here's where your patient defense comes in. There's your mystical defense, physical defense, check on that. And there's your step of the wind feature, all bundled together in one. And monk stances are unchanged, except for the fact that they now work with weapons as well. One thing that we all talked about as a team is that I want monks to be able to use the unarmed strikes in like headbutts and punches and kicks and stuff. And I think that's important for monks to be able to do. But in the old version, in the 0.6 version, we were forcing that on players. And now monks can wield a staff, dual wielding weapons or kunais or whatever type of things you want to reflavor into a monk version of a weapon, right? You can now do that as a monk. You can wield weapons or choose fists. Both are equal options that you can choose from. And then if we go down to level 2 now, this is where Flurry of Blows is. And if we want to get across the fantasy of being able to make a bunch of attacks, instead of doing it through like, oh yeah, you don't have to worry about the multiple check penalty anymore. I think this is a better way to do it, is when you make an attack, you can spend the stamina to attack again. And no other class can do that, spending stamina to make an attack. That's crazy. But this is how it's done for Flurry of Blows, and I think it feels much better. Then spiritual balance, as far as your key points, is unchanged. Speaking of unchanged, we have the Ranger. The Ranger apparently was in the best, healthiest state of all the classes. So shout out to you, Ranger. Had the least amount of changes by far. Literally the only thing that changed was on your Hunter's Mark. On that the first attack you make against that Hunter's Mark, it now ignores physical damage reduction. That's it. It's just a nice little baby buff there for the hunters. And then on the forest and the urban terrains, there's just more skill options. You still only get 2 skills, but there's just more options to choose from with those skills. Commander also did not have a ton of changes and was in a pretty good spot, but it did inherit something from the Paladin, which I think people will love. So your stamina is the same, Inspiring Presence is the same, Commander's Call is the same. Veterans' flavor feature now can interact with NPCs in a cool way, so I think think that's a nice little quality of life thing there. Combat leader is the same, except you now also get to analyze or do combat insight action for free. So once the combat starts, you give a D8 to one of your allies, and you can analyze a creature or check combat insight for free, just to get a lay of the land of the battlefield right off the start. But now you might have seen it already. Commanding Aura is super cool. Commanding Aura is what they inherited from the Paladin. The Paladin has been removed in DC20 and been replaced with the Spellblade. More to come on the Spellblade. Stay tuned for that. But the Paladins had an aura. So we ran into a design problem with the Paladin being in the game, or back when it was in the game, is this whole concept of, oh, Paladins have auras. Well, if that's the case, then we can't give other classes auras in general, at least at the class level. Subclasses, sure, but the class level. So then it's a problem. But now, with the Paladin being removed, commanders can take on that aura. And instead of a banner, this object that they have to interact with, that enemies can take and they have to keep track of, and it's the only class in the game also that used to have the feature was Heraldic Banner. They used to have this banner situation. You can still role play it as a banner, sure, but and then maybe there's a subclass. Stay tuned for that. There could be a subclass for the Warlord that interacts with banners in that way. But you are the aura on the battlefield. It is your commanding aura that gives people buffs in that way. So now the commander gets to be that aura, and it feels really good on the commander now. And I think it's in a good spot. And then there's the rogue, who actually had some really interesting changes, and I really do like where the rogue's at now. They can use light shields now. It's just a super small little thing. They have mastery with light shields if you want to now. Rogue stamina. They regain 1 stamina point if you hit a flanked target, hit a target affected by a condition. Both of those are the same as before. The new thing here is once per turn, you can regain 1 stamina when you use a cunning action. What's that, you say? How does cunning action work? Here's the new cunning action. You gain 2 spaces of movement when you take the disengage, feint, or hide actions. You can use this movement before or after you take the action. So if you want to take the hide action and you're just a little bit away from the place you want to hide, cool. Cunning action gives you 2 movement speed right away that you can use before or after that action. So you want to hide? Cool. Take the hide action. You instantly get 2 spaces of movement. You move over and hide. Cool. And you get a stamina point for doing it. Sick, right? So hiding now lets the rogue be a little bit more elusive and sneaky in that way in rewarding them with stamina. Feinting, being able to try and trick your enemy, trickery, right? Trick your enemy with some sort of moves and little adjustments that you're trying to make before you make that strike in that spot you're trying to get them. Get a little bit more movement before you can do that type of stuff. And then disengage, trying to get the heck out of there. If you want to run away, you're able to do that and be a little bit more slippery. Overall, I think the cunning action is at the next level now as far as what the intent of what this was meant to be. Before, it was just a copy-paste of the 5e's cunning action, which is you can spin a minor action and you can disengage. Not that exciting. So now I can't wait to see rogues play with this. It's going to be so much fun to be able to see the type of wiggling they can do now. Really love it. Debilitating strike, essentially unchanged. Skill expertise. Now it interacts a little bit differently with skill masteries. You're only able to have 1 mastery increasing thing at a time, just to be clear with that. So you can't like, oh, I'm a human and I'm a rogue and you have this expertise stacking to crazy levels. And this also now gives you a skill point, which makes it a bit more enticing. If somebody does want to pick up skill expertise, they can pick up skill expertise with their multi-class talent and then also get a skill point to use right away. Thieves' Cant now also gives you an extra language of your choice, so you're a bit more able to talk around wherever you're kind of, you've been talking to people, you know people and stuff, right? You get an additional language on top of Thieves' Cant, which Thieves' Cant technically is kind of like a language, kind of. So there's 2 languages essentially. If you didn't notice, Sinister Strike has been removed from the rogue. So the concept of having conditions on the target and dealing more damage based on the conditions and all that type of stuff, that's been moved to a subclass, an assassin subclass for the rogue, which is maybe the most earliest sneak peek I've given for subclasses in DC20. There's going to be an assassin subclass for the rogue that deals, and that's where you're going to see Sinister Strike, where you can deal more and more and more damage depending on how debilitated and how many conditions your target has on them. But what does that look like at the rogue at level 1 or 2 is Cheap Shot. Cheap Shot gives you +1 damage on martial attacks against creatures that are flanked or have at least 1 condition. Any type of condition like that, they're distracted, they're held down, they're grappled, you still get that class fantasy of being able to apply conditions and be rewarded for it, because rogues also get 1 stamina when you attack a target with a condition. And now they also get 1 damage when you attack a target with a condition. Or flanked, technically. So there's that little sneak attack type situation that you're familiar with. And evasion is the same thing, except now you can't gain benefits while wielding heavy armor or heavy shields, because there were some weird interactions as far as that's concerned. But yeah, there's the rogue. And there is all the changes in 0.7. I'm super excited with these changes. I think DC20 is in the healthiest spot that it's ever been, and if you can see the improvements, even just looking just from 0.6 to 0.7, if you look at the classes and where they're at balance-wise, if you try and even crunch the numbers math-wise like me and my team have been doing, the game is in such a healthy spot right now, and it's only going to get better. And as the Kickstarter does well, as there's more and more support for this game, I'm able to bring on more and more people. I have been essentially working on DC20 by myself for years before, and then it was just me and Purius, and it was just us two. And then we started to build out the team more and more. And then because of the support on Patreon, and because my patrons literally were like, yeah, stop making D&D content, I was able to take the team that I had that was making D&D content and move them over to DC20. I've now also gained a team of beta developers and reviewers and stuff, and the amount of quality increases is because of all of those changes. They're able to bring in people to help lift up and support this game and take it into the stratosphere as far as quality and next level feels of play and fun and epicness. So if you want to be a part of that support and a part of this community, all you gotta do is watch the videos. But if you want to truly help take things to the next level, right now the Kickstarter is literally everything. The Kickstarter launches June 4th, 11 a.m. Central Standard Time. There's a launch party the hour before it. Check it out. Actually, by the time you're watching this video, that I'll have a link down in the description of the live stream launch party that you can check out as well, kind of get notified for when that launches. The first few minutes and even seconds that the Kickstarter launches, people that jump on and back it, is the better the trajectory it'll have up into wherever this thing goes. So I hope you like these changes. Let me know what you think down below. Buckle up for this crazy wild ride that's going to be June and this whole Kickstarter thing. So, and also there's a link to the Kickstarter below, notifications. We're trying to hit 5,000 people following it, so we're getting so close to that too. But anyway, stay creative. Think outside the box.